All right, Alexander, let's do an update on what is happening in France. It looks like Macron is putting together a new government, a new prime minister and cabinet, and he is trying to work with the left, some parties on the left, in order to prevent what happened to Barnier from happening again. Most notably is he is excluding Le Pen and National Rally from any talks about the new government that he's putting together. What do you think is happening in France? What is
It's a
Macron up to?
If you have been following our programs on the Duran from the first day when this election, the parliamentary elections happened, we always said that Macron's ultimate plan is to split the left. I mean, the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's group, is a solid, disciplined group. It's the right. It's not the far right. It is simply the right in France. It won the most votes in the election. By any logic, it ought to be the government now. But of course, as we all remember, there was this extraordinary manipulation during the election whereby left-wing candidates stood down in seats where the centrist candidate, loyal to Macron, was ahead, and Macron, his candidate, stood down where the left was ahead, all to exclude the National Rally. So it was pushed, the National Rally saw its vote. Its parliamentary totals pushed down. The left and the Macronists were pushed up. And we said that having achieved that, having blocked Le Pen from holding a majority in the French parliament and forming a government, Macron's game would be to try to split the left, to isolate Mélenchon, who is the left's nominal leader, and to win the left centrists, the socialists, and people like that, and to try and form a government with them. And he's close to achieving it. I mean, we went through some rather complicated parliamentary politics. The left centrists put up, if you remember, Lucy Castis as their proposed prime minister. Macron refused that. That caused, the left, even the centrist left, to be angry with Macron, at least to pretend that they were angry with Macron. Macron then came up with Barnier. Barnier formed the government. The government wasn't supported by the left. It wasn't supported by the right. It was voted down in the French National Assembly. Now all that theatre has been done. The centrists have shown, or think they have shown to the French people, that they're not going to be pushed around by Macron. So having done that, they're now preparing to go into coalition with him. Of course, they're not calling it a coalition, but that is what it really is. So they're meeting with him. The socialist leader, Olivier Fabre, is been to the Elysee. They're talking about agreeing who the next prime minister will be. They're saying that in return for Macron's new prime minister being more friendly to some of the things that the socialists are, want to see, they won't vote against him in confidence votes. So that, in effect, puts the initiative back in Macron's hands. It means that even if the socialists nominally remain outside the government, in effect, they're part of it. So this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a centrist government, which is what Macron has wanted all along. It is what the socialists have wanted all along. They've never really been happy about the fact that they are part of a bloc that is led by Mélenchon, whom they loathe. So the result is that they've now gone through the motions of each being opposed to the other. Now that they can get back to business, the centre, in effect, the European centre, the EU centre, the parties that are loyal to it, can come together and continue to govern France in exactly the same way that they've been doing for decades, and ever since, arguably, the end of the presidency of Jacques Chirac.
All right, a couple of thoughts, comments. Mélenchon must be very upset, very pissed off about this development. I would imagine.
He's denouncing Fabre. He's saying that he's a traitor and that he's engaging in betrayal, and that this is that this is a huge wrong move and all of that. But either Mélenchon is a complete fool, which is possible, or more likely he knew this was going to happen all along. Mélenchon has always struck me as being one of these people who doesn't really want to be in power. He thrives by being in opposition. So he sets himself up for being betrayed. I mean, that is his comfort zone, if you like, and he's happy with it, I think. So anyway, he's going around denouncing Fabre. Fabre, nonetheless, says, that he's made all the usual things. That there's a time to say no, and there's a time to say yes, and now is the time to say yes, and that kind of thing.
So Macron is successful in breaking off some of Mélenchon's coalition, and he'll get a government in place. And it looks like we're going to avoid the process that happened to Barnier from happening over and over again, at least until the elections in 2027. And we won't have to, Macron won't have to call an election in 10 months' time, which people were thinking might actually... Or is that still possible?
Well, that is what he's telling the socialists. You see, the thing to understand is that, of course, the election that took place in the summer was a very, very strange election because it resulted in an outcome that was completely different from the one that the French people actually wanted. I mean, it was not how they wanted it. So the socialists, who are a shrinking party, have been inflated beyond their natural size because of the arrangements that were done in the election in the summer. So they want to avoid another election, which might cut them down to their true side. So Macron, one of the things he's telling them is, come along and do this deal with me. We won't need to have an election in the summer, and we can do without an election. Well, of course, the reality is that with Macron, he can make all of these promises. He can say that he will do these things. But of course, if it suits him in the summer to call an election, because perhaps his prime minister is proving moderately popular or successful, then he will. I mean, any agreements that he's reached with the socialists, that the socialists might be relying upon, aren't worth the paper they're written.
Right. And my final comment or question is Macron went out of his way to say that what's happening right now with the socialists bears no resemblance to the way Germany has been run with Olaf Scholz and the Greens. It's nothing in common with Olaf Scholz's coalition with Annalena and Robert Habeck. But it sounds to me like this is exactly what Macron is doing. He's just not formalizing the part that the socialists are in a coalition. They're going to have power, but they're not going to be a traffic-like coalition like what Olaf Scholz formed. Like a shadow. It's going to be like a shadow. Traffic-like coalition. Yeah.
When a politician, especially if it's a politician like Macron, comes along and tells you that what I am doing is absolutely nothing like what you think, you can be absolutely sure that it is exactly like what you think. Of course, it's exactly the same assortment of people being brought together to achieve exactly the same thing. It's, again, a government of the left centre. Bear in mind, Macron himself used to be a member of the Socialist Party. Not that long ago, by the way. I mean, people forget this, but Fabre and Macron were both socialists at one and the same time. He was, I think I'm right in saying that Macron was a socialist finance minister in a government of the left at one point. So these people have both common party political roots and ultimately identical ideological affinities. So it's not surprising that they're coming together in the way that they are. I just get to make one quick observation. Again, the people of France let themselves be tricked in the election. What we're seeing happen is completely predictable. The left came together. They won't work with Le Pen. They insist that Le Pen is completely unacceptable, that the right is completely unacceptable. They say at the same time that they won't work with Macron. They form this grouping. The purpose supposedly is to form a government of the left. And what do we get? We get more government by Macron. I mean, this is something that has happened in France time and time again. With every election, we see that more people in France come to understand that, which is why the National Rally and Le Pen's support has steadily increased throughout the time of Macron's presidency. But it still is astonishing that so many people in France fall for this thing. And one wonders how much longer it will take before the penny finally drops that if you go along with all of this scaremongering and you go on voting for left-wing candidates who are not really left-wing and centrist candidates who are loyal to the EU centre, you will continue to get the same failed government that you're so unhappy with.
I just want to make a general observation on what you said. This trend of cobbling together various parties and putting them under one umbrella coalition during an election, this is really destroying Europe. And people are voters are falling for it. They see this as one entity, or maybe they believe that this is one entity, but they also know that it's not one entity. These are 3, 4, 5 different parties. Many of them hate each other. Many of them have nothing in common. They put them under an umbrella in order to achieve some sort of an election result or an election blocking the candidate that they consider as anti-EU or far right or whatever. This is really destroying the election process in Europe. And in many countries, they tried it in Hungary. They're going to try it again in Hungary in the next elections. They tried it in the previous elections. They did it in Czech Republic. We see it in France. It's being used in different ways, but that is the pattern.
In a kind of way, they did it in Britain too. I mean, admittedly, Britain is outside the EU, and the Labour Party is nominally a single party. But the Labour Party itself is a kind of centrist coalition nowadays. But it's always the same. Always you end up creating playing these very kind of cynical games, which are not politics. They're anti-politics. They are taking politics away from voters and are concentrating politics and power in the hands of basically oligarchs and manipulators who want things always to remain the same. And what it is doing is it's breeding cynicism, which is now at terrifying levels right across Europe. It's breeding corruption. And that we have to also say. And it is creating a political desert. I mean, we have situations like the one we have in Britain, where the government support was always thin and it's collapsing. It's unable to govern in any successful way. The same thing is happening in France because no real political leader can ever emerge out of a process like this. It's destroying Europe, as you absolutely rightly say.
Yeah, because these umbrella coalitions, they don't really have a policy. No. Their goal is to prevent someone else from governing. That's it. That's their goal. Yes. That's all they're good for.
Yes.
They don't have a platform. I mean, whatever you think of National Rally or whatever you think of Fidesz or whatever, it's at least this is a single unit. It's a party with something that in common, that has a policy, that has a platform, that has a position. what was it? What was it in France? The NFP or whatever. There's no policy. There's no platform there. What happened in Czech Republic at the elections, the last elections, where they cobbled together five parties. There was no platform of policy there.
No.
This was yeah.
Well, I mean, again, we saw the contrast when we were in Hungary. I mean, you may not agree with everything that Fidesz does. You might not agree with Fidesz at all, but they have given Hungary a strong and effective government. The result has been economic growth, a rise in living standards, a budget and financial systems under effective control, and an effective foreign policy. No European country, France, Germany, all of these countries, none of them, the Czech Republic that you talked about, Spain, none of them have anything like that, nor can they, whilst this system that we've just talked about remains in place. But of course, one entity wins from this. That is Brussels, the EU centre, as we have talked about many, many times. The EU centre does not want strong states led by strong governments and strong leaders, because if such a thing ever were to happen, inevitably they would challenge the EU centre, and the EU centre doesn't want that in any shape or form. And the EU centre is instrumental in various ways in creating the situation that you've just described.
Yeah. All right. We will end the video there, the Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video update. A link to the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Take care.